Hey, everybody, it's Zach, your friendly host of the EV Resource Podcast. This is something that's kind of unusual, I know. Normally, I don't start an episode without recording on my computer. I'm using the phone. It's actually kind of heavy in my hand because this is not the first take that I've done this part. But this episode is a little unusual compared to many of the others, if not all of the others that I've done, in that the guest that I have and I went on for about 2.5 hours talking about these topics. Naturally, I've tried to narrow things down and edit as much as possible. And all of the core content that you're going to want to see is included in this episode. So don't worry, you're not going to miss any of the major important points. But what I did edit out was a lot of the elaboration on the content. And it occurs to me, maybe there are some of you that do want to see that. So you can continue and listen to the rest of this or watch it on YouTube and you'll get the main stuff. But if you do want to have some of that extra elaboration, then I'm going to have that posted for the Patreon supporters. And I don't care if you sign up, watch it, and immediately cancel. That's fine. But the fact that it does take a little bit more of my time in the editing process to make sure that that's there, I felt like it was fair to ask for at least a little something to include the additional elaboration. If you do want the full elaborated episode, then you can go to Patreon and sign up and take a look. And it doesn't matter if you're on a tier or not. I don't care. But if you're not interested, then just keep listening, and we're going to get into everything right now. Coming up this week, I'm not going to get an electric car. Are you kidding? No way, because I don't even want to take the chance. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 177 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. And this week, we're kind of tackling the first one, talking about the EV news, but for a first time, I think, I'm actually bringing on a guest to have a conversation about the news versus just reporting on them. So I want to introduce you to somebody that has called in on the EV Resource Hotline, who I've talked about quite a bit on the podcast and who has known me my entire life. This is John Hurst. He is my brother. He is an EV owner and one of the most intelligent people that I know personally. So, John, I want to thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. That intro was very generous. And I'm super excited to be here. I think this format of being able to have a conversation about the news is going to be really neat. And I think people are going to get a lot out of it.
Well, certainly, I hope so. And the things we're going to talk about today are probably the biggest issues in the EV space right now. So generally, just to give people an overview, I want to tackle the Hertz selling of their EV fleet, or the majority of it, mainly Teslas, because the headlines are all over the place. And I think a lot of people are having misconceptions about exactly what's going on with that situation.
And why.
Talk about EV affordability and get into the revision of the 30C tax credit. And then naturally, and I think this is going to take the majority of our time, talk about EVs in the winter and what happened in Chicago specifically, why it happened, and then at the end, really give an idea of what we can do to prevent something like that from happening in the future.
Sounds great.
Before we get to the conversation with John this week, I do want to thank our podcast partner, Titan Auto and Tire, right here in Central Virginia. Titan has 3 locations that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids, and from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com.
I had been hearing about the Hertz selling a whole bunch of their EVs out of their fleet, which I guess is about a third of all the EVs that they have. And one of the arguments for selling all of these cars is that the cost of upkeep was so high. And I'm wondering, is that because of damage? Because for me, the cost of upkeep on my electric car is next to nothing. So I'm like, where are they getting this? But once you account for the damage, then that starts to make a lot more sense.
So that's one of the symptoms of their cost is damage. Absolutely. But why would their EVs have much more damage on a regular basis than what we would see in the cars that we own? So
Well, people don't care about rental cars. They're just a drag on a rental car.
we got to work even further past that. Okay. The general public is very hesitant, uneasy, unsure, and sometimes outright will refuse to drive an EV. It's unfamiliar. They're scared of it. They just don't know anything about it. So they're like, what? So a lot of the time with Hertz, you've got the Polestar 2, the Teslas, and I believe they also had Volvo XC or Volvo C40s.
Okay.
So
I didn't realize they had any Volvos.
I believe so. I'd have to double check the exact numbers. It's been a little bit since I looked into it.
Fair.
But even let's just take Teslas because Tesla is very, very different from any other type of vehicle when it comes to how you as a user interact with the vehicle. Let's say I've never driven an electric car in my life. I've heard about them. I'm not interested, but I'm not opposed. It's just I'm not there. I'm not a part of that early adopter phase.
Sure.
I'm flying into town. I have a mid-level sedan like a Nissan or Toyota Camry or something reserved. And I get to the airport and they're all out of those. The only thing they have left is a Tesla Model 3. Well, okay, fine. I got to get to where I'm going. Just give it to me. And the scenario I'm painting here, actually, from what I've been reading and hearing, is fairly common. So it's not like I'm just making this up. I'm using what I've pulled from places to kind of take those pieces and put it together. But what you find then is Hertz, because what they're good at is the transaction of you need a car, here's a car, have a nice day. That's what they do. Hertz does not.
You have one job.
Educate on how to drive the car, how to use the car, how to find where the controls are to do anything with the car, how to fuel the car.
Never had to before.
Just like dealers have never had to talk about how to fuel vehicles, that's not what they've ever done. So now, not only are we expecting an entire industry to take on more responsibilities to educate people about what they're going to be driving, but also about how to fuel it. It didn't happen, which is also part of the problem.
And where to find a gas station.
But in addition to it not happening, I don't think the responsibility should be on the rental company to educate you on how to use the vehicle.
Who should have the responsibility for education then?
Hi. I'll get to that in a second. Let's keep focused on Hertz.
Sure.
So Hertz, the whole deal with buying all the EVs, I believe, was because we know EVs cost a lot less to own and operate. So there's this mindset and expectation that they're going to save a lot of money. Secondly, and this is hearsay, so don't take it for gospel, but my understanding is that the CEO was really trying to work out a deal to keep Hertz out of bankruptcy and make the company relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm sure there was some politics and some stuff related to the deals. Typically, rental car companies will acquire fleet vehicles for way less than MSRP. Tesla didn't do that, to the best of my knowledge, from what I read way back, I think it was like 2 years ago, that Tesla basically said, no, you want these cars, you can pay what we ask, and you're not going to get them for any less. I don't know if they worked out a deal or not. So, one, they were already paying more just to get the cars. But then they're putting people that don't know anything about them, don't know how to drive them, and are probably used to, let's say, a Toyota Camry 4-cylinder, because of course you're not going to see the V6 Camry in a rental fleet typically.
Right.
So at best, we'll say maybe it had 200, 220 horsepower or so, 0 to 60 in what, 7-8 seconds. Even the base model rear-wheel drive Model 3 will do 0 to 60 in 5-6, unless it's the newer ones, and then maybe 5-8. Some of them are even quicker than that.
So that could be as much as, well, maybe not quite 2 times, but it could be as much as 2 times as quick as what somebody's used to driving.
It could be, and you have that immediately.
Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to push down the accelerator pedal as much as they normally would, and all of a sudden they're way farther ahead than what they were expecting to be.
Yep. Combine that with regenerative braking, with being unfamiliar with controls. So if I need to figure out how to turn the wipers on, in a Tesla, you don't have that on the stalk. You have to go to the screen. So now if the camera that I'm looking into is the windshield and the road ahead, now I'm looking over here and I'm not familiar with it. So it's not like I can just go boom, right to it. I'm searching around. Meanwhile, somebody stopped up here and I might see it too late.
You're going to get a beep, 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 and then you're into them.
Probably. I mean, I don't know specifics about how damages happened. I haven't read that anywhere. But if you're putting somebody in a vehicle, and like the Volvo C40, it's 400 horsepower. Like, and they're just giving it to anybody to rent. So it's those types of situations that you don't educate people. Many times from what I've heard, they were giving people the cars at like 50% state of charge. Like they weren't charging them. So then they had to go and figure out how to charge them and learn on the fly a whole new system.
Mm-hmm.
Why did they get damaged? I think because people didn't know what the hell they were doing with these things they'd never experienced before, and they got into trouble a lot. The public is not ready to rent an electric vehicle unless they have already previous experience with electric vehicles.
Yeah, they would need to know, well, especially with the Tesla, with the Spark EV that I have, the controls really aren't particularly different from a gas-powered car, but with the Tesla, they're way different.
Right.
So you would need to know, have a familiarity where controls are. You would need to know where you can charge the car, and at least a little bit about the difference between a Tesla charger versus CCS charger versus CHAdeMO, based on what's available wherever you go. You need to know when you need to charge it, and then besides that, there are so many different factors that play a role in the range that the car has, whereas with a gas car, that's not anywhere near as significant.
Honestly, I think most of the problems are education and experience. So you asked who has the responsibility to do that. If it's not the rental companies, if it's not the dealerships that are selling them, so who needs to do this? Well, anybody that wants to interact with an EV ultimately should have the responsibility to learn how to use it themselves.
Sure.
And that sounds nice, but it's probably unrealistic to expect that anybody's going to take responsibility to educate themselves, because look at the country. You can just look at anything. And
I have a whole lot of people, like, I do computer repair for a living, and I have a whole lot of people that wax poetic about how computers used to come with user manuals, and they don't now. It's like, well, computers are doing way more than what they ever used to. You don't get software with the computer like you used to. It's on you to figure out what you want to do with the computer and how you want to do it.
So who's responsible for teaching people about computers?
I'm gonna raise my hand, just like you with EVs. No, yeah. I Google.
Yeah, it is tough, and just throughout the evolution of EV resource, I started this to educate, mainly because I was looking for answers and had to look at a billion different places to find them. So I was like, well, there needs to be a centralized location. Well, now you can find the answers and a lot of answers in a lot of places, but yet people don't know what to look for or what questions to ask in order to get the answers.
It's hard to find an answer to a question when you don't know what the question is. Yeah.
Exactly. The solution is more events, ride and drive programs, and webinars and other things that can actively engage with people in order to give these answers. And just in having conversations, anybody that owns an EV gets questions from friends, family, people on the street all the time.
Yeah.
So what we need to do most is make sure that EV owners are educated as much as possible through clubs, organizations, community outreach. That way, when they're sharing information with people who know nothing, they're sharing the correct information. It's a huge problem, and it's so big that there's so many different ways to approach it. And I don't know if there's any one answer, but I also know that it will never be enough because humans are inherently not willing to take the time to educate themselves. It might be their responsibility to do so ultimately, but until they have a problem, they're not going to be looking for a solution.
Right.
They're reactionary, not proactive. So I think Hertz didn't take that into account when they were going, hey, we got EVs, check it out, come to us. The marketing of that works. I never got around to doing it, but I wanted to rent a Hertz vehicle.
Sure.
Just
if I was going to rent a
it.
car, I would probably, there would have to be some interesting circumstances that would make it that I wouldn't rent an electric car.
Oh, yeah. I have no interest in renting a gas-powered car, even for road trips. Doesn't that make sense anyway? Because do you really want to put all of those miles on your car? No, put it on somebody else's car. Let them have the.
Well, I get the idea that it's like, okay, I have my car. I like my car. I bought it because I like it, and I want to use that, and I don't want to have to be bothered to go and, do this thing with some other car just to take a trip. I like my car. I want to use my car, and I want to, use my car for the trip.
Except it's the Cadillac Escalade or the Chevy Silverado or the Ford F-250.
Right.
That I want big and safe. You go to Europe or China, you don't see massive vehicles with massive battery packs in order to get them to go 400 miles. It's ludicrous, but that's what we have. So we have these big batteries and massive vehicles that cost more to make and therefore cost more to buy. Well, what is the immediate answer that those that want EVs put out there have come up with? Let's give them money to help them buy the more expensive vehicles. It's not, let's work with the manufacturers and an education campaign so that we can build less expensive EVs. No, it's let's keep building the expensive EVs and just give people money with tax credits or rebates or whatever else. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but it's solving the wrong problem.
Right.
It's making EVs more affordable-ish, but it's not making more affordable EVs.
Well, speaking of affordable EVs, back to the Hertz thing, if they're selling all these cars, I just looked up, and you can go to hertzcarsales.com, I think is what it is.
I'm going to pull it up because I want to see it.
Yeah, hertzcarsales.com, and they have /used-electric-vehicles.htm, where you can go and buy the electric vehicles. There's a lot of Model 3s, Model Y. But yeah, like one of the questions that I had was, well, if they're selling all these vehicles, it's got to be good for somebody that's looking for one of these electric vehicles that they're selling and trying to get a less expensive one. Hopefully it's not one that, somebody's ragged on because it's a rental car. But that would be an opportunity to take advantage of what Hertz didn't really think through in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it like uh our exact car that we actually got, a 2021 Model 3 Standard Range Plus,
Mm-hmm.
they've got for 21.8. Well, with the tax credit starting in January of this year, they now have $4,000 available as a credit for used EVs. So if you took that $21,000 Model 3, 83,000 miles on it, wow, they've driven. Well, it was a rental. So yeah, of course.
Yeah.
If you take that vehicle, take $4,000 off of that, well, now you have a pretty reliable vehicle that has probably been ragged to heck because, like, to your point, it's a rental. For 17 with taxes, you're still under 20,000 for tax tag title and all of that. That is a pretty good deal. The people that need access to reliable and affordable transportation the most, an EV makes more sense than anything else because chances are it's going to just work. They're going to go out, turn it on, and it'll be great, even in the winter. And yes, we will get to that. So there are a lot of programs, and one is the 30C EV tax credit specifically for.
It's for installing charging situations, right? Like for putting a charger at your house.
So yeah, 30C is designed specifically for building or giving people money for charging equipment.
I'm actually really liking this idea because, we live in an area that, according to the Department of Energy's website, is eligible for this grant. And we have currently a dedicated 30 amp line that's just 110. There's nothing else on there because it was made for, mom and dad to come and plug in their camper, and the receptacle's on the side of the shed. Perfect. But it's only 110 volts, and even with the Chevy Spark EV, it takes me, if it's going from dead, even with the higher 12 amp instead of the 8 amp setting, it's taken me, probably close to, if it's really dead, like close to 14 hours to charge up completely.
Sure.
And so I think, I'm wondering if we can take that tax credit and get reimbursed for switching that over to a 240 volt instead of, 220, 240 instead of 110, 120. And so this might actually be a tax credit that I look into.
You should, especially because for individuals, it will cover up to $1,000, which in most situations, that will cover the charging equipment. What I need to look into this further, to be honest, because I have a lot of questions that I haven't found the answers to yet, which when it comes to government programs, I find that's often the case, and it takes me months to dive into it to actually get to the nitty-gritty details. I don't know if this covers cost of materials for running wiring or receptacles or a new breaker. I don't know if this covers the labor for the electrician to actually install it, or if it's just for the EVSE equipment itself.
Stay tuned for next week's podcast.
I mean, not next week, but like, there's a lot that I don't know about this, because while this was a program that was available from January of last year, 2023, I didn't actually hear about it. Like, I didn't know it existed.
And if you're not hearing about it, most other people aren't either.
Yeah, like when I interviewed Ben Nussbaum of EV Government, he, like, one of the biggest things was there are a lot of programs, both federal and state level, specifically to help people purchase and pay for charging or the vehicles themselves. And so many people don't know about it. They're putting it up there going, all right.
Well, shoot, it only cost about $150 in labor to put in the receptacle on the side of the shed and get that wired in correctly from, an actual electrician. We didn't do it. And getting that switched over to 220, 240 would not be that much either, because half the work is basically already done, but I would still need the equipment to plug in the car. You don't think so?
So that can cost more.
Sure. Well, that's what we have the tax credits for.
Maybe
to help
I don't
out
know.
with anyway.
You know, and my understanding of tax credits is that it's offsetting any tax liability or tax that you owe the IRS.
Yeah.
They will take.
So if you don't know any money in the first
offset
place,
that.
then you're not going to see it.
The people that need the financial assistance the most are the people that don't make a lot of money. Poverty level below. They don't have any tax burden. These programs do nothing to help disadvantaged communities. Yet things like this with the updated guidance for 30C are now shifting the geographic focus to rural and disadvantaged communities.
Mm-hmm.
So they're putting guidelines in there that say this is only for these groups of people, but yet the groups of people
Not going to apply to them anyway.
Can't use it. I don't know if that's on purpose or not, or if it's just ignorance. When it comes to politicians, I'm could be one way or the other.
Right.
You know, as a skeptic when it comes to politics and government in general, it would not surprise me in the least if they create programs so that they can say, we created these programs, but nobody's using them, but then design it so that it can't be used. The overall EV tax credit is a great example of that. Yes, $7,500 for brand new EVs, but they have to be assembled in North America. The parts from the battery have to be here, blah, blah, blah. And oh, by the way, it's going to be now. And automakers are like, we don't build them here. It's going to take some time. We'll do it. We're coming. Hyundai is building a factory here. Volvo, Volkswagen, Tennessee. Is it Tennessee? North Carolina? Ooh, crap. I forgot.
One of those states.
I think it's Tennessee. But yes, they're all coming. Alabama is seeing EV factories that are getting started, battery manufacturing facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's all coming back to the US. I love that. What I don't love is they said, yep, it has to be as of when it started.
Right.
So then half the EVs didn't qualify. Half the EVs didn't qualify. Half the people in this country don't have a taxable burden to be able to even qualify themselves. And then I don't care that they have caps on income. So the richest of the rich don't qualify. Well, whatever. They don't need it. So
$7,500. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, like whatever. They don't need that. So it sounds great. It makes for great headlines. But when you tear it apart and look at the practical reality, well, let's go ahead and move on because I definitely want to cover talking about EVs and cold weather. We can skip over the solid state battery stuff with Harvard, which it's great. It's a great story, but we don't have
solid state batteries. Just tell me when they're out. Tell me when I can get one for my car and when it actually applies to me. Other than that, just talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
And
basically, like
I'm sure there's research. I'm sure there's people working on it. You know, Toyota's got a big thing, but
maybe
until it actually is relevant to me.
Yeah. I know we wanted to talk about EVs in the cult because there's been, again, a lot of stories where EVs don't work. If like last year, it was, oh, you get stuck on the highway for 10 hours, you're going to run out and the highway is going to be littered with dead vehicles clogging up the road. That was quickly disproven by many people, both doing the math on paper, but then also a lot of people actually sitting in their car overnight in the cold. Kyle Connor with Out of Spec, he recently did another test where he simulated a road trip with his Model S and got stuck in traffic. We continually have to revisit that, it seems, because the messaging of, hey, that's not true, EVs are fine for that, falls on deaf ears.
Yeah.
One thing to really look at is everything that went on in Chicago, specifically Chicago. And I'm not saying Chicago is the only place where EVs or charging might be an issue.
Well, we also haven't heard about it being an issue anywhere besides this one case in Chicago either.
Largely not, which is interesting. Like, you have to ask, well, why not?
Right. I guess, first of all, what exactly happened for anybody who hasn't followed the headlines recently?
Yeah. What happened in Chicago was a result of a number of different factors. So it's kind of like the perfect storm, if you will, where had one of those factors been addressed, you might still have had an issue, but certainly not a massive issue. We'll kind of walk through each of these, and I want to tell you what they are first, and then we'll kind of go back and revisit. So you have, once again, driver and operator education when it comes to how charging an electric vehicle works in the cold. You've got rideshare drivers using fast charging almost exclusively and certainly excessively, because that's the nature of that business. You're driving, you're making money. Time is money. I'm getting back on the road as quick as possible, hopefully. You've got people renting cars, lack of education and a situation there. And then, yes, you do have chargers that fail. The equipment breaks or the software fails and things go wrong. And the current networks do not have the best way of responding very immediately, quickly to situations like that. So there's a lot to unpack.
So, as far as I understand it, the situation was that you had a bunch of people pulling up to charging stations, and there's already like a whole ton of people waiting, and it's taking forever to charge the cars, and you have broken down vehicles at the chargers, and then a whole bunch of chargers that weren't functioning in the first place, which reduces the amount of chargers available. And so then you had cars that were sitting there waiting for a while and then dying and not being able to pull up to the charger because they were completely dead. So yeah, break that down for us.
All right. EVs charging in the cold. If you want to go to a fast charger, the battery, in order to charge very quickly, needs to be at an optimum temperature. Okay. It cannot be too cold. The battery cells themselves, or just like any liquid, they start to cut slushy, and then eventually at some point, at some temperature, it will be frozen. The way the batteries work themselves is they need to be preheated or preconditioned before fast charging. That's not necessarily the case charging on level 2, 240, or 110, because it charges so slowly that you're not asking for a lot of demand on the battery cells.
It's like if you're moving slow through molasses, you're not going to notice how thick it is. It'd be the same thing as moving slow through water. But once you start trying to move faster through it, then it's like, oh, this is different.
Right. And in this case, it's not us moving through it. It's electrons going through the electrolyte.
Okay.
So most EV owners, they don't know that you need to precondition a battery or should precondition a battery before getting to the charging station.
Heat it up a little bit.
So if you haven't done that and you roll up to a charger, and normally when you've charged, you're used to seeing, we'll say 50 to 150 kilowatts. Maybe not right away, but very, very soon thereafter.
Shoot, that'd be wishful thinking for me. I'm the exception to the rule.
I mean, you could hit 50.
50, yeah.
Yeah. So if you see 4, the charger's just getting started, we'll give it a couple minutes. 15 minutes go by and you still see 5 to 10 to maybe 15 kilowatts. You're going, oh, this charger doesn't work, or something's wrong with my car. You're not going to immediately think, wait, there's science that the battery needs to heat up and blah, blah, blah. No, that's never going to enter your mind. It's ridiculous to even expect.
It's never been an issue before. It's not an issue when it's warm out.
Right. What is happening is the charger is pulling electricity off the grid to heat the battery first. That is not a quick process. And depending on the temperature, can take a long time, half hour, maybe an hour, just before you can start fast charging.
then you can have your 15, 20 minutes of fast charging.
Yeah. So a lack of education meant that people assumed something that was going on that wasn't. Now, there were chargers that were actually broken, and that is unfortunately with some networks out there more common than others, and certainly it shouldn't happen. Even if they just stayed plugged in, well, we've already said it could take a long time just to get to the point where you start charging.
Yeah.
Well, that is fine if you have enough chargers for all the cars that need to charge. But as you mentioned, a lot of people needed to charge. Part of that is because rideshare drivers are now catching on to the fact that EVs will save you a ton of money over a gas car. And because aside from the fact that Uber and Lyft are promoting EVs by allowing you to rent one through them from Hertz, and I think a couple other rental companies as well. So they're making EVs very accessible and ideal for ride-sharing drivers. Ride-sharing drivers, as I mentioned, need to charge over and over and over, sometimes 1 or 2 times a day if they're driving long enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that charge doesn't take 20 minutes and now it takes an hour and 20 minutes, the problem will compound. And you mentioned it,
the traffic jam.
If people are just sitting there, well, a rideshare driver isn't going to go try to charge when they're at 50%. They're going to take the next trip or the next trip.
Yep.
So they're going to go to the charger when they're at just arbitrarily 10%.
Yeah.
Well, if you're in an EV stranded in the cold, yeah, you can outlast a gas-powered car easily if you've got a good charge.
Sure.
If you're at 10%, you're going to run out.
Yeah.
So now there's that problem.
Especially if it's a Tesla and you have the what's that, Sentinel mode or whatever it is.
Sentry mode?
Yeah, with all the cameras and using all kinds of extra power.
Yes, but Sentry mode doesn't operate below 20% on the battery.
Oh, really? Okay.
So as soon as you hit 20%, it will not turn on.
Okay.
So yes, but not necessarily.
Might not have been a factor in this particular case.
I strongly doubt that it would have been.
Okay.
Sentry mode by itself will not cause you to have a dead battery. So charging took longer, and charging is going to take longer in the cold no matter what. That's just the nature of how chargers and the cars work. It's not significant. I mean, when the battery is at its optimal temperature, it might be a couple minutes longer. It's not going to be an hour longer.
Sure.
So you have that problem. Basically, there wasn't enough supply. There's too much demand. There's a lack of education. And yes, there were times when things broke. But if we had more fast charging available, the times that a station does go down wouldn't be as significantly affecting the entire charging electric vehicle ecosystem as what we're getting. If you go to a gas pump and it's got a little bag over the handle, you don't write a news story about it. You just go to the next pump over. And if the whole gas station's down, so what? You drive 2 miles and you go to the next one.
That's because gas stations aren't the shiny new toy of the industry.
Well, but they're everywhere. If EV chargers were everywhere, even if they were still the shiny new toy, you wouldn't have lines. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't have people waiting. You wouldn't have people running dead waiting.
Well, it's a smaller percentage of chargers that aren't working then compared to when there aren't that many. You get one that's not working. It's a bigger percentage. Right. It's more of a story.
I like to point to the country that is leading the world in terms of how many, the percentage of electric vehicles that are in the total fleet of what's being used.
I had to guess it'd be somewhere in Scandinavia.
Norway.
There you go.
I'm sure people have problems because problems happen. Nothing's perfect. But we don't hear about issues like Chicago coming out of Norway.
Mm-hmm. Or even Alaska for that matter.
One of the things that bugs me about all these reports from Chicago is that the reporters, when you report on a story, you're positioning yourself as an authority, somebody that knows about what you're talking about.
Might depend on the network.
They're putting themselves out there as such, whether it's true or not.
Sure.
It might depend on the network, and then even then on the reporter. The reporters that I've seen putting all these stories out, the things that they're saying are blanket statements. I've got an article from USA Today. It's about the Chicago thing, and I'm going to quote it here. This is, what was the byline? Rex Hupke, Huppke. I don't know anything about Rex. I'm sure he's a great guy. He might know a lot about EVs. I have no idea. So keep that in mind. But
What you got?
he says, and I'm quoting this, the problem is fairly simple. Batteries don't work as well when it's really cold, reducing the range electric vehicles can travel. Batteries also charge slower. So the demand for EV charging has outpaced the EV charging infrastructure. The result, a bunch of people with Teslas and other battery-powered cars have wound up stuck or waiting in ridiculous lines to power up. Now, there's nothing about that is false. Every sentence as a paragraph or individually is true.
Yeah.
But it's what's not said that I have the biggest issue with. All vehicles don't work as well in the cold, reducing their efficiency. Therefore, as he mentioned, the total range or distance they can travel with one grouping of fuel, okay? Whether it be a full tank or a full battery. If you've got a gas car with a 12-gallon tank, that's not going to take you as far in the winter. We don't see that being said. So it's isolating EVs, connecting them to these problems as if it's implied that it's only electric vehicles. Yeah. They do charge slower. Okay, that's true. I don't really have a problem with that. Reducing the range, yes. Demand outpaced supply. We touched on that.
In that case, yeah.
Very true. Going to be a long time before that is addressed because of the way the press is responding to specific situations. Chicago's a great example. The snowstorm on I-95 that shut down for like 20 hours last year, and here in Virginia, just north of me. Very, very, like, when has that ever happened? I mean, here in Richmond anyway, we didn't even have snowfall that accumulated on the ground last year. And we had a little bit, I mean.
Well, weather's only going to get crazier. You're going to end up with weird situations more often.
Yes, but even then, it's not the norm.
Yeah.
But yet, people who don't own electric vehicles hear the headlines and they go, well, I am never going to do that. I'm not going to get an electric car. Are you kidding? No way. Because I don't even want to take the chance.
The vibe I'm getting from the general public and the industry is that people are taking a page out of Toyota's book where they're saying, instead of going completely full battery electric, let's have the majority of our options be plug-in EV, like plug-in hybrid EVs, PHEVs. Mm-hmm. And that seems like for a lot of people a reasonable solution where there's still electrification, they're still getting the benefits of the better fuel economy and less energy usage to get from point A to point B. They don't have to worry about the range anxiety. And then if they can't plug in, if they can plug in, great. Then more efficiency, lower cost, everything. But as per usual, my only significant concern with that is it increases the complexity of the car, which means there's more to have to worry about maintenance and fixing.
Yeah. You have the best of both worlds,
but
you also have the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Plug-in hybrids are the least reliable drivetrain configuration. Mm-hmm. Gas-powered cars are more reliable than plug-in hybrids. Of course, full battery electric vehicles are more reliable generally than anything else. But plug-in hybrids are the least for that reason. Complexity.
Just because there's more parts.
A lot of the reasons that EVs are beneficial is that you get away from the thousands and thousands of parts in an internal combustion engine.
That's exactly why I bought one.
And everything else. But as things evolve and we do see more situations, and I start to analyze and think through this problem of education and experience, the general knowledge and narrative that is preventing people from being willing to get education and experience, I've always felt that plug-in hybrids were a great stepping stone, the gateway plug, if you will. I didn't make that up, so I won't take credit for that. But I think it's hilarious. Plug-in hybrids, if they're used properly, it'll allow people to get the taste of driving an electric vehicle. And I would bet an annual salary that the majority of people that have that experience are going to be much more likely to consider, if not demand, that their next vehicle is full electric.
Sure.
But I don't think that this country is ready for full battery electric vehicles because the infrastructure isn't there, the education isn't there. Those are facts. Anybody, if you want to argue with me, say, oh, everybody already knows everything they need to know and the infrastructure is perfect. Like, come on. Like, those are the two biggest issues.
I got into an argument that I didn't understand why it got as heated as it did on Facebook, basically with somebody who was an advocate for EVs for the most part. Like, we basically agreed on everything, except I'm sitting here saying, we're ready, we're here, we've arrived. And then, we get into a situation like this and it's like, oh, well, yeah, we really haven't. Okay, I got to go back to him and be like, hey, you were right.
We have all of the tools we need at our disposal to get 99% of the jobs done related to transportation with full battery electric vehicles.
Yeah.
What we don't have is people who know how to use them or the places to refuel. Everybody pretty much agrees we need more fast charging. I tend to think we need more fast charging than what most other people would say, only because I tend to believe that human nature is not going to change. The way we think, the way we accept new things, and generally the way humans go and try to learn new things, most people don't. And even when they are presented with new information, if it contradicts with whatever preconceived belief they already had, even if that's wrong, they will dismiss the truth, the new information, and rationalize that there's something wrong with it in any way they can. It's cognitive dissonance, as Missy says from the other room. Like,
right. Yeah.
You're just not going to have people that even want to bother with it. It's not laziness in that they're actively lazy.
Well, and then on top of that, layered on top of that, you get culture wars where people are actively anti-EV, even though they don't have any rational reason for being anti-EV.
Yes, I don't want this to become political, but it's important to identify, like, okay, there are certain groups in this country that are anti-EV. Generally, if I could wave a magic wand, I would take politics out of it. We're talking about technology, for crying out loud. Like, we're talking about economy, personal as well as on a larger scale. We're talking about an environmental, or even just affecting the quality of the air. I think everybody would probably say, I want my kids or myself to be able to breathe air that is not polluted. And if anybody wants to go breathe polluted air, I've got some things to say that I won't. But, there's tailpipes all over the place that have access to what you are looking for. See, now I'm getting snarky. We can't get into politics because I'm going to be a smartass.
Well, in terms of for preventing the situation that happened in Chicago and keeping that from happening in the future, the things that seems to me that would need to be done are that we need more infrastructure to make up or to keep up with the demand in electric vehicles. So we need more chargers. We need people to know that they need to drive their car around a little bit, or in particular EVs that have the ability to precondition, give them time to condition and just understand that it's going to take a little bit of extra time at the charging station compared to what it would if it were warmer. Are there any other things that I'm missing that would prevent a situation where you have a whole huge pile up in the cold and cars going dead because they've been waiting so long?
None that come to mind currently. I think that probably would address most of the issues. Certainly that would make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we do now, today, no matter who we are, okay? If you're listening to this and you're not an EV owner, what can you do to prevent this from ever happening? If you are an EV owner, what can you do to prevent this not only for yourself, but for other people, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, if somebody is watching or listening to this that doesn't own an EV, clearly they're curious because otherwise you're not going to click on this.
Yeah.
What can you do? Well, spread the right information, educate yourself, and then help educate others, and buy an EV or not. Do what you want. If you're an EV owner, well, learn about your car. Charge slowly overnight if you have the ability
Right.
to do that. If you do not, then do your very best to go to a public fast charger when nobody else, hopefully, should be there. Like, this is really something that's going to take everybody's efforts. The major theme across the entire, however long it's been, and I don't know because by the time I edit this, let's just say close to an hour because that's going to be my target. I've got work to do. Education.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's very important to me. That's why EV Resource exists. That is, of the 3 pillars of the brand refresh, learn is the first. It's so important. And in many ways, actually, I'm getting overwhelmed with the learn because there's so many new things that I need to add. And I don't even like, what do you put on there? So I think the best way to actually handle the design, and this is going to be my ask for the episode to everybody that's still listening to this point. Email me questions that if you're an EV owner, you have now or had before you bought an EV. And if you don't have an EV, email me questions that you have about EV ownership or charging or whatever. Based on the questions, I can then generate the content to respond to that from an education basis. I think that's probably the best way to handle things at this point. So that's my ask. hello@ev-resource.com. Send me your questions and I'll do what I can. Always. I will always do what I can and probably commit to doing more than I'm able to because that's just what I do. But I will absolutely do that. Before I end the episode, I want to thank the support that I get. And I always thank the Patreon supporters, and I will do that in a second. But I also want to thank everybody that has given a rating on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts and a review, or has gone to the social media like Facebook and given a review on the EV Resource page, engaging in the conversation, leaving a comment on a post or the YouTube videos. Those things put the whatever's there in front of more eyes, which then, once again, education, we're able to reach more people. And they might not be receptive to it immediately, but I think the more we get the right information out to more people, I think we will start to chip away at this problem. So I definitely want to thank everybody that's done that. And if you haven't, encourage you to do that if you would. It's free. It takes a little bit of time, but not much. And it's super easy to do. And most people already know how to do it. But I definitely want to thank all the Patreon supporters because while I am not all about the money, I can't do it without the money either. So I've got 3 different tiers that can be signed up on Patreon. You don't have to pick a tier, actually. John, you're one of the Patreon supporters that's not on a tier. And so, of course, as always, it's not often I get to actually say thank you directly to one of the supporters, but thank you. So at the top tier, the director tier, I want to thank Rajeev, Narayan, and Andy Cooper. At the middle tier, the executive producer tier is Christopher Lawrence. And then there's also a producer tier. One of the perks is that they get their names announced once a month. If you are interested in their names, it's always in the show notes. And if you want to have your name added to the list, you can go to patreon.com/EV resource. I do have a number of various benefits for all of the Patreon supporters because I want to give back more value than what I'm getting from that, in addition to just the free content like the podcast, for example, that I'm just going to have anyway. So there's all of that. There's a lot more. I don't know how long this has been, so I'm not going to get into everything, but you can go to the EV Resource webpage and browse and check it all out, ev-resource.com. And you can always email your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, whatever you want. I love it all. hello@ev-resource.com. And John, I want to thank you for joining me this week. I really think that if we can figure out how to do this in a shorter period of time, that talking about the news and having more of a conversation like this is something I'd like to do more often. So thank you for your time and joining me and tackling some of the things that right now are definitely the biggest headlines.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast.
As always. Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching and listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.
Okay. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode... Ooh, what is it? Wait a minute. That's important.